Hello, everybody. It's very heartwarming that everybody arrived. We are on the second meeting with Dr. Gabor Mate. Very happy to have you with us. I'd like to thank also our interpreters who join us, and we have translation into Arabic and into Hebrew. And maybe just before I hand it also to Mona and then to Gabor, just to say something about this meeting. My name is Assaf. I'm a meditation teacher and an activist and other things. And we had the first meeting with Dr. Gabor Mate a few weeks ago regarding what is happening in our region of the world and about war and trauma and truth. And we want to have another meeting. These are meetings which are open to all. We're happy to have it in this way. And Mona and I spoke a bit today about the meeting, and we thought that maybe kind of like the first meeting was this hype of inviting Dr. Gabor Mate, and what does he have to say? And now we had that meeting, and now it's maybe a chance to go deeper, maybe to more subtle things, and we'll have more time for questions. Last time it was more like just us talking, mostly Gabo, and now we'll have also questions from the participants, and really a chance to go deeper, more meaningful, I hope, and like use our time well. So we'll have about an hour, a bit more, for this meeting. And just to say that you can write only to Mona and I. And generally, if you have questions, you can send them. We'll use mostly the questions that were sent. But if we find something which is very meaningful, we might ask you to come and speak, and to say about if you are speaking, try to keep it precise. Like not sometimes we go into speeches, try to keep it to the essence as much as possible. Mona?
Yeah, thank you, Asaf, very much. I would also just like to add that for our last meeting, we have a recording. It's basically on YouTube, and now we have really wonderful people volunteering, translating the meeting into Arabic and Hebrew. So thank you, Daniela, and thank you, Ma, for the work that you've been doing. This is really great for the possibility to have the translation happening. Hold on, I just need to. And today we have Haya and we have Yael with us who are gonna translate simultaneously. So thank you very much for that. And thank you everyone for sending your questions. I think we'll just go directly into the meeting. Yeah, I just wanted to correct myself. So it's Daniela and Manar. Manar is translating to Arabic the subtitles, and Daniela is translating into Hebrew the first meeting. So thank you for that. Yeah, there you go.
All right. So thank you all for attending. Let's just acknowledge that it's extraordinarily difficult and painful time. No matter what you think here, there's no way that your heart is not in pain. And if it isn't, it's only because you shut it down. But I don't imagine anybody on this call is in that category. Let me begin by a question that I've been asked before. I think it's important to address. And this is from, I'm reading the question. I won't read out the whole question, but I'll give you the gist of it. And as an Israeli who's strongly objecting to the occupation, the breach of human rights, and the injustice and the crimes that Israel has committed and is committing, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. They're saying to me, but when they hear me speak, they often feel triggered because I seem to be very one-sided in my presentation, and as if the Palestinian side had nothing to do with the reality that's going on, and why do I choose to convey it that way? And there's an allied question that wasn't asked, but I will address it anyway. So as to that question, first of all, let me acknowledge there's some truth in that question, in the sense that my emotional investment sometimes makes me less empathetic to people's experience in Israel. I just acknowledge that. I'm not proud of it. I'm not thinking it's good. I'm just talking about my emotional orientation. So sometimes in my tone, even when I acknowledge Jewish or Israeli suffering, it's not as open-hearted as it might be. So I'll just acknowledge that, and it's a dynamic that I have to deal with. But that's really only a small part of it. The larger part of it is twofold. Number one, you have to understand, I live in North America. And I've been a Jew in North America who, for the last almost 50 years, have been very aware of the occupation, its brutality, its unfairness, its murderousness. And I've been aware of it living in a Jewish community that mostly doesn't just deny it, it even ignores it. And I've been living in a North American context where the North American media basically has ignored the Palestinian experience. Not only has it ignored it, it has distorted it. So that there's frequent articles about Israeli culture, Israeli poets, writers, speakers, what's happening in the politics of Israel. But there's been virtually nothing for decades about the experience of the occupation on the occupied. So that's the context that I'm speaking in. So I'm trying to correct a huge historical distortion and unfairness. And that's the context in which I'm speaking. So that's the first point. I mean, you have to really see that. Let's take the Ukraine war. In the Ukraine war, not only do they report the politics and the big military events, you get constant reports in the American press, North American press, the Western press, about the subjective experience of individual Ukrainians, teachers, students, artists, theater people, just what it's like to be in that war. That subjective experience of the Palestinians is not presented in the North American press. It's beginning to be now in a very small way as a result of the recent horrors, but it's non-existent. So there's my own emotional bias. And by the way, adding to my emotional bias is my perspective that I'm far more interested in what my people are doing than what somebody else is doing. Our responsibility is what we do. And that's what I'm addressing. What are we doing? What are we doing? What we're doing is much more concern to me than what the other side is doing. That's just how I see human responsibility. But there's a third power imbalance. There's no comparison in a power relationship between Palestinians and Israelis. Israel has one of the most powerful militaries in the world. It's got tanks and drones and airplanes and missiles and armed vehicles and bombs supplied by the largest military power in the world. And the Palestinians have virtually nothing. And so that the person with the power in any relationship is far more responsible than the person who's powerless. That's just how I see it. So there's three considerations. One is my own emotional concern about what my side is doing. Secondly, the vast gap between what's presented here in North America and what the reality is, which I've witnessed myself when I visited there. And then thirdly, this tremendous power imbalance. And without understanding that, it's not like there's two equal sides. There's no equality here. So that's where I'm coming from to answer that question. Now, there's an allied question, which is, I live in North America and I can say whatever I want. I don't have to live with the consequences of it. Well, you know what? That's true. I live in North America and I don't have to live with the consequences. What I say, at least not like people with the consequences. Okay, that's true. But if that's the case, then I should have nothing to say about South Africa during apartheid. I should have nothing to say about the Ukraine war. I should have nothing to say about the genocide in Rwanda. I should have nothing to say about anything anywhere else in the world, because I also don't have to live with the consequences of that either. So if we're gonna have a rule that we can't talk about anything where we don't live, let's all shut up about anything. Otherwise, I have the right to speak on what happens in Israel, Palestine. Number one. Number two, if you're going to have a rule that people who don't live there and don't have to live with the consequences directly have no right to speak on a subject, I say, okay, I'll agree to that. Then let all the Jewish organizations in North America, let all the politicians in North America, let all the newspapers in North America shut their mouths, because they don't have to live with it either. So either we apply the same rules to everybody and none of us speak about anything that doesn't happen close to our home, or we give ourselves the freedom to address any issue that concerns us. So that's my answer to that particular question. And I'm really sorry if sometimes my speaking strikes you as unfair or picking. You know what? Honest to God, I'm not picking one side or the other. It's not that I'm favoring Palestinians over Israelis. I truly believe in my heart and in my mind that what is happening now is disastrous for both people, and that the policies that I've opposed are actually in the long term going to end up causing the utter disaster for the Jews there as much as for the Palestinians. And I'm not interested in picking sides. I'm interested in how do I see the truth. That's all. In that sense, I've said before, I'm not pro-Palestinian. In a sense, I'm not going to support anything that Palestinians do just because they're Palestinians, but I will support something that I think is true. So that's the answer to that question. Now, let me take one more question and then I'll return it back to you. It has to do with what is my definition of terror compared with military resistance and fight? Well, you know, there are international definitions of terrorism, and terrorism, for the most part, is seen as violence committed largely against political, religious groups or civilians in order to intimidate them and to instill fear in them in order to achieve political goals. And so, by and large, it's violence designed to instill fear and intimidation and coercion, specifically, or not specifically, but particularly against civilians. So that's a good definition of terrorism, I think. And the only problem is that in North America, or generally, when we talk about terrorists, we talk about particular groups that happen to be fighting against us. But our states that impose terror on large numbers of people internationally, they're not considered terrorists. So by that definition, the United States is the largest terrorist state in the world because it has imposed mass killings internationally. 1 million people in Indonesia, hundreds of thousands or millions in Southeast Asia, tens of thousands in Latin America over the decades. Now, in 1987, there was a furor over terrorism, and there was a vote in the United Nations on what terrorism is and against terrorism, pretty much the way I just defined it for you. And that vote was accepted by everybody in the world except 3 countries. United States, Israel voted against it, and Honduras abstained. Why? Because the international definition also recognized the right of occupied people to fight against the occupier through military resistance. And at that time, Israel and the United States were allied with South Africa, which was facing terrorism from the African National Congress, led by Nelson Mandela. And Israel and the United States, who supported South Africa and the apartheid regime, did to agree to that definition of terrorism that allowed occupied people the right to fight back. So, as you can see, it's a complicated question. Now, for the record, I think that suicide bombings, blowing up airplanes, killing civilians in supermarkets or movie theaters, that's terrorism. It's not to be supported. At the same time, I do believe the Palestinians have the right to armed resistance against an occupation. That's just their right, according to international law. And I'll finish by saying that there was a great man whose name is not much talked about in Israel. His name was Marek Edelman. And Marek Edelman was the second in command of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And he became the top leader after Ankiewicz, the first leader, died. And Marek actually escaped the Warsaw Ghetto after the defeat of the uprising under the sewers. He became part of the Polish resistance. After the war, he became a cardiologist, and he lived till he was about 90 years old, I think. He was a lifelong fighter for liberty. He opposed the communist regime. He supported the Solidarity movement, and he also supported the right. He also criticized them for their attacks on civilians. So I'm with him. I think the Palestinians have the right to resist by any means whatsoever, but not when it comes to killing civilians. On the one hand. On the other hand, when it comes to killing civilians, there's no comparison in numbers. There never has been. Not since 1947. There's been no equivalence of power. There's been no equivalence in the numbers of civilians being massacred. And the fact that one is done by an army in uniforms and some airplanes, that doesn't make it any less terror. That's my view. I don't know whether you guys like to ask questions or whether you like me to go.
Yeah, like 3 of the people who asked to directly ask their questions are here.
Okay.
Or maybe we would start with Reem. Reem, I'm gonna unmute you. And you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, hi everyone, and Ramadan Kareem. I want to ask this question. Do you think how we tell our stories of pain must change? Like, we live in a country where there is 2 narratives that cannot meet at one point. Or do you think it's not necessarily for them to meet? Thank you.
But look, in any relationship, whether it's my marriage, whether it's my relationship with my adult children, my friends, or anybody, and not just talking about me, I think this is a general human tendency. We tend to consider and come from our own sense of woundedness and our own pain. And over the decades in this situation, there's been a lot of woundedness on both sides. There's no question about it. But we're never going to get anywhere if we come only from the point of view of our own pain. The most difficult thing is to actually understand the subjective experience of the other. So for me, the question is not, do we tell our stories of pain, but do we listen to the other story? Do we listen to the other side's history of pain and suffering? How much are we willing to do that? Are we willing to open ourselves to the experience of the other? And for the most part, now I'm just going to give you a subjective impression. And by the way, I'm not pretending to be an expert in any of this. I'm just a person with a point of view, with a certain set of experiences. The only thing I can say on my own behalf is that being a Jew and having been a Zionist, I thoroughly understand that side. I mean, I could speak it in my sleep. But for the most part, I just give you a personal impression. You may not accept it or take my word for it, and I wouldn't blame you. But when I speak with Palestinians, and I've been to the occupied territories a number of times now, including 2 years ago, I don't say this is universal, and this is not scientific. I haven't done a survey. But the people I meet with, they tend to be far more aware of the history of Jewish suffering than the Jews that I know are aware of Palestinian suffering. That's just my personal impression. I'm not saying that's true for all Palestinians, but this will surprise many of you. And the last thing I want to be seen as is some kind of a spokesperson for Hamas. But even if you look at the Hamas literature, they acknowledge the Jewish suffering in Europe. So they're aware of it. They can't not be aware of it because they've been beaten over the head with it. Whereas for the most part, and this is not universal either, there's lots of wonderful Israelis who are very aware, many of them on this call. So I'm not saying it's one side or the other, but on the whole, all I can tell you is in the Jewish communities that I move in and in the North American context, and I think in Israeli context as well, for the most part, there's very little willingness to hear the experience and the pain of the other. And it's that willingness to hear the pain of the other that's me. So can we hear the pain of the other? That's the real question for me. Now, somebody asked me, do I think that a conscientious Jewish Israeli citizens have a moral obligation to leave Israel? I don't know. I'm not there. I can't even begin to think about that one. I mean, look, I live in a country where there's a lot of injustice. I live in a country, Canada, where there's a lot of injustice against the indigenous people and continues to be. And historically, there was genocide and oppression and land dispossession. That's what happens. But I'm not considering leaving Canada. I do what I can to work with those people and to advocate for them. So I don't think it's a question of me telling you you should leave. You need to consider what you're capable of doing and what you're ready to do and what risk you're willing to take. I know an Israeli friend who's coming to Seder in a few weeks, and he's an Israeli Canadian. He's just given up his Israeli citizenship out of disgust as to what's being done in his name. But it's not for me to tell somebody else what they should do. And I don't know what you can do in your own country. It's difficult enough here. Here in Canada, if you speak out for Palestine, You can lose your job, or you can be canceled. I've been canceled. I've had a major speech at a university, nothing to do with the Middle East, but on trauma and stress and addiction, that was arranged a year ago, but it was canceled because of my views on Palestine. One of my sons just had a speech canceled at a Canadian university because he was going to speak his truth. And they said it was a security risk. So it's difficult enough here. I'm fully aware of the difficulties and dangers that Israelis, I'm speaking of Israeli Jews now, let alone Palestinians, of the dangers and the difficulties and the rejections and intimidation and the shaming that you might face as people who speak up in favor of justice. I'm in no position to tell you what to do. I can't tell you what to do.
Thank you. Wow. I want to give the opportunity to Nava to ask the question now. So Nava, you're on. You have to unmute yourself. I asked you to unmute and you have to unmute yourself.
Now it works.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so first of all, it's an honor for me to speak with you, Dr. Mate. I have been teaching about your work for many years and to my students, and also a big bow of appreciation for your efforts to seek the truth. I just want to say that I live in a family, in a house that we are trying to get closer to the truth and both see what's happening in the occupation and the Nakba and really learning about that. And when I listen to you, I think what I hear is that you're trying to wake Israelis and Jews to agree to look into the shadow of the Jewish nations. I think, like in every human, we know that there's the shadow, and when people are brave enough to look into the shadow, that's where transformation can happen. I think that's what you're trying to do by shaking the Jews and Israelis in your talks. And I wanted to actually ask from you, because of your specialty, I feel that in order to us to benefit from you, actually, I think we need to go another step, which is really related to what you can really give us from your great experience. And I want to talk about mindsets and ask you just to say a few moments what I want, how I am trying when I'm trying to seek the truth, how I'm trying to find a framework that can actually let us go forward. And then here, if you can help us with that. And so I want to suggest that that Zionism and Jews, is not one thing. You said it by yourself. And Palestinians, of course, are not one thing. And within Zionism and Jews in Israel, at least, there's been many groups and a wide range of mindsets, some beneficial and some not beneficial and even dangerous. For example, the settlers are people with very dangerous mindsets. And within the Palestinian people, there have been many groups with a wide range of mindsets, some beneficial and some not beneficial and even dangerous. Same for Arab nations. For example, the Muslim fundamentalists, such as Hamas and ISIS, are people with very dangerous mindsets. And in theory, there were time points in the history of this region that if the beneficial mindsets would have been dominant, Jews and Palestinians would have found a way to create a win-win solution to live together in peace and harmony. And the fact that it didn't happen is a lot because at certain time points, the non-harmonious and even dangerous mindsets became dominant. And I suggest that this happened because the dangerous mindset on one side and the dangerous mindset on the other side actually co-create each other and lead to this dangerous positive feedback loop. And then these two groups on both sides, by creating chaos and terror, are constantly silencing the beneficial, peaceful, and justice-seeking mindsets. I mean, these voices are also silenced in both sides, whether you're Jew or Arab. And what happened in the October 7 was this explosion of this feedback loop. And we thought that this was like that this is the highest, the peak point, but actually what we're seeing now with the 12,000 children dead and all the injured and dead and houses is just this feedback loop.
Can I just ask you to, just because of time, and if you have a question that you wish to raise?
I'm getting to the question.
Fine.
Okay, and what I want to ask, so what I'm suggesting is what I think could move us forward. In addition, so I think the Jews in Israel, in order to create beneficial mindsets, we need to look into the shadow of the Jewish state and acknowledge the dark side and the injustices. And what I'm asking you, in addition to that, is how do we create new beneficial mindsets in these difficult conditions? How can we deal with the dangerous mindsets on both sides that have become monstrous and deadly? How do I think that most of your work is about that, about the fact that it's about mindsets and about the transformation of these mindsets.
All right, so thank you. First of all, just to clarify something, I appreciate your question about mindset, and I'm going to address it. But before I do, just to clarify something, I'm not just speaking to convince Jews and Israelis. I'm not just doing that. I don't beat my head against walls. I'm speaking to convince or to enlighten as best I can anybody who will listen. And specifically, naturally, I'd like to address Jews as much as I can and to ask them to examine their own mindsets, for sure. But I'm speaking to two other audiences as well. That's just as important to me. Just as important to me. Number one, and some of you may not like this, but I'm speaking because I don't want the Palestinians to feel so alone. The Palestinians have been abandoned by the world. They've been allowed to languish under a brutal occupation now for decades. Their historical experience has been denied. In this country, Canada, it's illegal to deny the Holocaust. And I don't agree with that law. I think people should be allowed to deny whatever they want. I believe in freedom of speech. But if we're going to deny one aspect of history, let's have a law against denying history. And then we'd have a lot of people in Canada in jail. People who deny the experience of the Indigenous people here in Canada. There's still a lot of people who deny that. People, of course, who deny the Nakba. So I'm speaking just as a witness so that the Palestinians whose stories have not been told don't feel so alone, because there's nothing I can do to alleviate their suffering. Nothing that I do will save the life or the limb or the little finger of one little Palestinian baby. But it's so terrible to feel alone. And I don't want them to feel so alone. So that's one reason why I speak. I also speak to a lot of people who are intimidated because their hearts are telling them that what's going on is terrible, it's inhumane, their hearts are breaking. And let me tell you, there's a heaviness around the world right now. On the part of people who care about anything, there's a heaviness. But their media and their political leaders are telling them something totally different. So there's a disconnect between the experience of their hearts and what their minds are being told. And there's the constant repetition that if you criticize Israel, you're an anti-Semite. So even an Israeli filmmaker who makes a film about the occupation and wins an award for it in Berlin is said to be a Jewish Israeli filmmaker, is said to be an anti-Semite, as you know. So I'm speaking into that as well. I'm saying don't listen to that lie. So that's two other audiences that I'm addressing besides just the Jewish shadow. Okay. Now, coming to your question about mindset, you're totally right. Everything is about mindset. There's a song that I play at the beginning of all my workshops. It's by the American singer Johnny Cash, and it's called In Your Mind. And there's a line in it that says, 1 foot on Jacob's ladder and 1 foot in the fire. Now, if you remember Jacob's ladder from, is it Genesis or is it Exodus? Jacob wrestles with this angel of God. In fact, doesn't the word Israel come from wrestling with God? And so there's this dream of this ladder to heaven. So 1 foot on the ladder, 1 foot in the fire, which is the road to hell. It all goes down in your mind. So our mindsets, which is not just our opinions. I mean, there's our opinions and there's the facts that we look at or we don't look at. But underneath the facts, underneath our opinions, underneath the contents of our minds, there's a mindset. It's set, it's oriented in a certain way. And the mindset of most people has got nothing to do with facts or opinions. It has to do with an emotional position that has to do with the unconscious. And if you look at human development, the right side of the brain, which is where the unconscious is mostly lodged, develops before the rational side. And so what's in that unconscious will very often determine our rationality. So you can have the most rational, intelligent people saying the most inhumane things and deny the clearest reality because their mindset will not allow them. Because emotionally they're programmed in a certain way. Now, the Jewish experience, conditioned by a lot of history, is very much that of us as victims. And so that's the mindset. So everything that happens to us because we're Jews. Now, is there a lot of truth behind that? Yes, there's a lot of truth behind that. But is it the truth? No, it is not the truth. Truth is far more complex than that. Now, how do you change people's mindsets? You know, Nava, if you figure that out, let me know. Because the only mindset that I can really work on is my own. And I only begin to do that when things don't work. When my marriage relationship is in crisis, I could make a decision. I'm with the wrong person. I'm going to get out and find somebody else. Or I can start questioning, what are my assumptions? What are my beliefs? What is the unconscious influence that is determining my point of view? And there's no way you can do that for anybody else. We can only do it for ourselves. And any attempt to do it for somebody else just brings resistance from their mindset. That's my experience. So there has to be a willingness. So your question is an essential one, but I don't have an answer as to how to change anybody else's mindset, except to speak with them with as much understanding and compassion and listening as we can, and hope that something will open up. I'll say one final thing. This business, or at least your phrasing of it, of there's toxic mindset on both sides, I don't agree with you. I mean, it's true. There are toxic mindsets on both sides. There are Palestinians who would love to see every Jew gone. just as there are Jews who want to see every Palestinian gone. Those are toxic mindsets. But as to what happened, if you look at the history of Zionism, there were people all along who warned about where this was going. You know when the first warning was? 1895, when Haya, who was, I think, Russian, his name was Asher Ginsburg, and he was a great Hebrew writer and thinker. And he said, in 1895, when there was something like 20,000 Jews in Palestine, and he said in 1895, but if we continue treating the Arabs this way, all that's going to happen is we'll end up with one small Levantine people oppressing or tormenting another Levantine people. And he said, if this is the Messiah coming, I don't want to see him arrive. There were people all along in the 20s, in the 30s, in the 40s, the 50s. In 1948, Hannah Arendt and Albert Einstein and other leading Jews wrote a letter to the New York Times warning about the danger of fascism in Israel because of Menachem Begin. So it's not like there haven't been warnings. It's not like there haven't been people trying to change the mindset, but they weren't successful. Now, why were they not successful? Because the Zionist project could only be achieved by the suppression, dispossession, and invalidation of the local population. There was no other way they could have done it. And they knew it. And so those that were committed to the Zionist view, whether they were on the left or on the right, they all participated in that progress. The Palestinian response to that was a reaction. It wasn't a cause. I'm not justifying it, but there's been this overwhelming power. There's been this ongoing project, which is still going on. And the Palestinians have been reacting to it, sometimes non-violently, sometimes brutally, sometimes with understanding, sometimes with toxic mindset, but it's been pure reactivity. Whereas on the other side, there's been a very consciously and deliberately pursued project, and it's still going on. It's still going on. I'm not even talking about Gaza. Forget even the horrors in Gaza right now. Just look at what happens in the occupied territories every day. Just read Haaretz. Just read Gideon Levy's and Amir Haas's and the other brave reporters who just tell you what it's like. And that's what creates the reaction. So I'm not going to get all upset about the toxicity of the other side reaction. I'm much more concerned with our own behavior and our own mindset. And Israel's tragedy is that it thinks it's much stronger and bigger than it is. Israel is just a little bully in a small neighborhood. It's capable of achieving its goals because the big bully in the world is behind it. It's a tragic mistake because the American empire is not going to last forever. It's already losing its power. It's already on the wane. It's already on the way out. We can see that. Number one. Number two, empires don't have friends. Empires have clients. Right now, Israel is a useful client for the US. It doesn't mean it always will be. And then where will this little bully be in a sea of Arabs? The problem is, as long as you're succeeding and winning, you don't question your mindset. You know, and if you look at countries like the US, if you look at the Vietnam War, when did they start questioning it? When they were losing. If you look at the Germans, when did they start questioning their mindsets? After their country was devastated. Until then, they all believed in it. Not all of them, many of them. So unfortunately, And in my personal life, I question my mindset when I'm suffering and what I'm doing is not working. So I don't have a lot of hopes for changing other people's mindsets. I think we have to question our own.
Thank you.
Before we move to the next questions,
Yeah, I feel like Asaf just sometimes just felt like, okay, just pause for 1 minute and there's no need. I know that we're like rushing time, but yeah.
Well, that's okay. I mean, we can go for a while.
So we have all the questions that we sent you, Dr. Gabor, and also there are
I
two more
want to say
questions
something.
that want to be asked, Asaf, sorry.
I wanted to say something regarding what now Gabor was saying regarding how do minds change and about listening. That I felt in my body that some of the things you said were triggering to some extent. And I want to just to put it here, that I assume it works for some Israelis. And my only asking is that we breathe into it. That we feel the body and we breathe and understand that what is said might be triggering. We don't need to accept it or not accept it, but acknowledge it. Acknowledge that some information might be triggering and put some trust that if I let it in, something new knowledge can enter the system, and we do whatever we do with it afterwards, but just settle into it or let it settle, especially for the Israelis here who I acknowledge myself with them, with us. So that's my only request maybe for us. I feel it works for me. This is why I bring it.
You know, also, you know, I'll just acknowledge that this is something I'm very passionate about. I mean, believe me, for the last 50 years, there's not been one day when I haven't thought about it. And especially these days. So it does mean that I don't necessarily come across like a Zen master when I talk about it. And sometimes I'm sure that whatever the truth or inaccuracy of what I'm saying, but there's also an emotional tone that's triggering for some people. And that's on me, you know, and I don't want to inflict my own emotional states on anybody else. So the triggering could be because of what I'm saying, but it could also be because of how I'm speaking. And that's on me. So I have to also watch myself as to how I speak and how aware am I of the impact of what I'm saying on my listeners. And sometimes I'm not aware. I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm not.
Yeah. So I want to, there are questions that want to be asked more than the ones that were sent to you.
Yeah.
And what I'm thinking right now is, I'm thinking to like read one Arab, one Israeli question so that we have both sides heard. So the question sent is, I think maybe it's not possible for her to say it in English, so I'm just going to read you the question basically. So it's from an Arab lecturer, Palestinian Arab lecturer in a Jewish university in which 30% Arab students are learning. So since the beginning of the war, I feel like I am suffocating and I feel like I'm betraying myself and my students because of the policy that Israeli of persecution that is being used by the Israeli government. Many times I have to be silent, and I cannot really. I don't feel like I'm doing my work professionally as I used to be, mainly because I feel okay. She's feeling like a duality And that has to do with the fact that that she is one of the people who she comes from a family that was like abandoned, or not abandoned, but villages that had to be forced. The people of the village have to be forced from Sasa, Sahmata in Arabic. And so she feels like this is part of who she is, or part of our history, of her history. And there's a lot of anger happening, and having a hard time to sleep, especially with the feeling with the people of Gaza that no one can actually speak about. So she's talking a lot about the duality, basically, with not being able to feel compassionate with the pain of the Jewish friends on one hand, and feeling that she's betraying her Arab students on the other hand, and asking basically if there's something, what do you think that she can do to help herself during this? Yeah.
Well, look, on a human individual level, there's tremendous suffering on both sides. And doesn't matter what I say politically, to have a family member killed or taken hostage or hurt in some other way, that's going to be painful and intolerable. And from that point of view, there's suffering on both sides. But what I hear you saying is that you have difficulty feeling the pain of that side because of what's happening to your people. Look, that's totally understandable. That happens on both sides. I mean, it happens in a much bigger way on the other side, where there's virtually no expression of sympathy for the Gazans are starving to death. Children are starving to death. Children are having their limbs amputated without anesthetic. I could go on and on and on. And you can't talk about that in Israeli society. So just forgive yourself for not being able to feel the pain of the other side. I mean, the fact that you recognize that you have that difficulty is a great step forward. But don't beat yourself up about it. Number one. Number two, this feeling that you're betraying your own people. Well, I have some news for you here. I teach this to all my students. There's no such thing as feeling that you're betraying your own people. That's not a feeling. Feelings are, I'm tired, I'm sad, I'm hungry, I'm angry. Those are feelings. That I'm betraying my people, that's an opinion. That's a point of view. That's a judgment that you're making on yourself. Now, I'm not making this as an exact analogy, but just to make the point really clear. In communist Hungary, where I grew up, if you criticize the government, you'd end up in jail. If you're a teacher, I remember in grade 3 once, or grade 4, on December the 27th, or the winter solstice, our teacher said to us, boys, I have to tell you this. This is Stalin's birthday, and it's also the darkest day of the year. But don't tell anybody I said that. So under certain systems, you just take your life into your hands, or you jeopardize your profession or your capacity to make a living, or your freedom, if you speak the truth. So are you betraying anybody? Forget that self-judgment. I understand the heaviness. I understand the suffocation. Even here in North America, people are losing their jobs. Never mind in Israel. So forgive yourself, would you? In fact, recognize that there's nothing to forgive. Just make a decision. Under the present situation, what is it that I can realistically do, and what is it that I cannot do? But don't make a moral judgment on yourself. And I say this to my Jewish friends here as well. Don't judge yourselves. Again, it's easy for me to speak out. I can't lose a job because I don't have one. It's rather easy for me to speak. You're not in the same situation necessarily. So on either side, don't judge yourself for your difficulty in articulating your point of view, because you may fear consequences. And you have to really consider that. So drop the self-judgment. Just make a realistic decision and then live with it. And possibly things will change over time. But in the meanwhile, just be conscious. Acknowledge your own feelings. Don't judge yourself for it, no matter which side you're on.
Thank you. So I want to give Shira the opportunity to speak. Hold on, I'm just gonna find her. Yeah. Here we go.
Hey Mona,
Hey.
hey, thank you Mona and Assaf, Ramadan Kareem. Hi Gabor, we don't know each other, but you affected me deeply in my life. I read many of your books, and that's why I want to thank you, especially for these times that you speak out. It's very meaningful to me as an Israeli who is aware, very aware from very young age, actually. And it's like I have so much I want to say to you, but the first thing, like I'm gonna try to keep it very as short as I can. I want to say that my loyalties lay with the Palestinians much more than Israelis. Since I'm like 17 and I didn't go to the army. And yeah, I'm being perceived as a traitor in my people. And everything you said in the beginning of the talk, I identify with it. I feel like I can criticize my own people. I feel like these are the people I can actually influence. I want to say that after Palestinian activists, of course, I think the most important activists are the Israelis. And there's a very difficult moral question, like to leave or to stay or to act from inside or outside. And like you said, your friend was willing to give up his citizenship here. And like you said that you feel very emotional about this subject, I feel so too. I maybe never feel hate, and I feel much hate. Sometimes it goes in waves, you know. Anyway, so towards a lot of the establishments, the Zionism. And it's very, very hard to live here. Like, okay, I stay here because there are people who cannot live. I have a French citizenship. I could go, I could immigrate. But there are Palestinians and Israelis who cannot leave. And if we leave them with the crazy people who are now murdering all the time, and, you know, 23,000 right now, is it the number? So I don't feel like I can go and just leave them. So the moral issue here is much more complicated. And my question is, that's what I sent Mona, and I'm gonna get to it. First of all, I want to say that I appreciate you and your sons speaking out. Also, Aaron and Danielle are speaking out. And it's like, we need you. We need this. And like, you're a person that I appreciate. And it's very difficult to express this opinion in Israel now. And hearing you expressing it and are not afraid to express it is very, very strengthening for us who are here. And we do exist. And I want to say to all the Palestinians who are in this talk that I'm deeply sorry, like for everything that my people have done. since 48, really, and before, and for Gaza. And I'm a teacher in a bilingual school. So I teach the third grade. I have half Arabic, half Israelis in my class. And I work there. It's children, we work with children. So anyway, we won't speak of the war. We try to protect them. But also I feel like most of the teachers are Arabic, actually. Some of them would identify as Palestinians. Some would try to like go as far as they can from that. We're Christians. But also I think they're afraid. So even in that school, nobody speaks. And we have to work as if we're building something while I feel like everything collapses, everything that I ever knew, all the hope that I had. And that's the question. Sorry for taking my time. It felt in the beginning of the war like my heart breaks, like I want to cry for each death. But I couldn't stop crying for more than 24 hours until a friend just told me, you have to survive now. You cannot feel the pain. It's too much pain. It's too much pain for one heart. So then I completely shut down and I just didn't feel anything. And I was working. And I want to find the balance because I cannot feel everything, but I cannot ignore what's happening. You know, and I am building while everything is.
Sorry.
So
Thank you for this.
that I'm done.
Mhm.
This is the question, how to find the balance. Or if you have an advice.
I think many of us have faced that same question. There's an Israeli friend who's a professor of philosophy who lives in Berlin. And she wrote to me, I'd be crying if I had any tears left. But I've lost my tears over the last 4 months, you know. So, Shira, you're not alone. Okay. Number one. And just know that you're not alone. Number one. Number two, in a much, much, much smaller way than you, I've had to deal with this issue because there's a Greek politician I spoke with recently. You might know his name, Yanis Varoufakis. He used to be the finance minister of Greece. And he says that since October the 7th, he's not been able to concentrate on anything. All he could think about is what's going on over there every day. Now, if you're a sensitive human being, and some people are more sensitive than others by nature, and some have been sensitized by experience, you can't help but feel the horror of it every day. You can't help it. It's just gonna stick in your heart like a knife. And for several months after October the 7th, I couldn't do anything else. I couldn't think of anything else. I was supposed to be writing a book, but I couldn't get down to writing the book. And it's much harder for you than for me because I'm here, you're there. So whatever advice I give is going to be very paltry, very insufficient, I think. But I had to figure out within myself the difference between being enmeshed with something on the one hand and being engaged with it on the other. Enmeshment means that it takes over your whole emotional functioning and that it dominates your body, it dominates your thoughts, it dominates your emotions. That's enmeshment. It's understandable. It's not helpful. Certainly not helpful to you. Then there's engagement. Engagement is when you make a conscious decision as to what can I do and what I can't do. And you do what you can, and you accept your impotence or your helplessness in the face of what you can't do. And this is where Assaf and his meditation teaching, I think, comes into it, because certainly the essence of Buddhist meditation, and I don't consider myself a Buddhist or anything, but I'm constantly reading the Buddhist literature. I have a book on my table called The Four Foundations of Mindfulness, for example. And it's all about noticing what happens inside and not identifying with it. So can you notice without identifying? Can you have some practice that allows you to be mindful and not have any mind state? Someone was asking about mind states before. Not every mind states dominate our functioning, but to notice what our mind states are. Can you find, and that's not an adequate answer, perhaps, but it's the best I can tell you. I'll tell you just one more thing, and I quote this all the time. Maybe I quoted it the last time we spoke as well. Rabbi Hillel, I think it was, who said that the task is not yours to finish, but neither are you free not to take part in it. So that it's not yours to finish. This tragedy is going to keep going and going and going. Not because any rational human being wants to, not because any Israeli really wants the tragedy to go on, not because of any Palestinian really wants the tragedy to go on, but because there are political forces and certain people who are going to keep it going, and they're dominant. So it's just going to get worse. It's not yours to finish. The question is, what contribution can you make while you're in it, at the same time as respecting your own needs? So try to be engaged without being enmeshed, and maybe develop some practice that'll help you do that. And believe me, there are millions of people around the world who feel exactly the same way as you do. That's all I can tell you.
Thank you. Maqbooli, hold on a minute. I'm gonna open the mic for her. Just one moment. And I just want to say I have so many things to say. I'm just really doing the role of the host. So this is really hard to keep silent. Go ahead, Maqbooli.
Okay, thank you, Mona and Assaf and Dr. Mate so much. I have two short questions. I promised Mona. And my first question is, as also I'm asking as a Palestinian, is there a responsibility for the victim? And I cannot deny that I'm also also besides all of the hurting and the anger and watching what's happening to my people in Gaza, I cannot stop myself also thinking about our own mistakes and being angry so much on that. So this is my first question. And the other one is about our situation, our special situation as Palestinians, citizens of Israel. Like we have been experiencing a very terrible also experience of silencing, to see all of this happening to the closest people to us as a people, as a nation, and not to be able to express or to resist or to do anything. First of all our tools are peaceful, and even this. So what kind of influence could this have on us? Because I see people get used to it. I see people who actually isolating themselves sometimes, and people also taking very bad decisions, like or adopting a very unhealthy stance or positions. So what could that also how can this be explained? This is my question. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, again, you're asking me to address a situation that I don't personally face, so it's rather easy for me to say whatever, you know. Two things. One is the anger that you mentioned. Just feel it. You're entitled to it. I've been in a state of rage now for years about this. And I've been in a state of rage about it since October the 7th. Just rage. Rage at the horror. Rage at the lies about it. Every day that we hear in the press here. Canada has let in 20,000 Ukrainians. Not a single Gazan so far, as far as I can tell. And who's in greater danger? Based on absolutely no evidence whatsoever, Canada cut the funding for the UNRWA based on confessions exacted by torture of a small number of people. So I'm not just enraged at what's happening over there, I'm enraged at what's happening over here. And you know what? I'm entitled to my rage. I have to recognize that it's there. I have to make sure that it doesn't dominate my behavior. But I'm not going to push it down. I'm going to own it. Own your anger. You're entitled to it. As far as, you know, we always talk about Israel, the only democracy, and the Palestinians have the right to vote, and, you know. In the United States, the average white person doesn't have a clue as to what it's like to be a black in the United States. The blacks have the right to vote. They can even be president if they're half white. And if they speak like a white man, they become president, like Obama did. And they can be policemen, and they can be politicians. But the actual subjective experience of what it's like to be a black in the United States, most whites don't have a clue about that. And James Baldwin, the great black American writer, says that to be an American black and to be even conscious is to live in a state of suppressed rage all the time. And the blacks in the States know better than to, if a policeman stops them unfairly, they know better than to express their rage. I don't think that most Israelis have a clue what it's like to be, never mind a stateless, rightless, oppressed Palestinian in the occupied territories. I don't think the average Israeli's got a clue what it's like to be a Palestinian Israeli. Because you people are probably pretending to be nice too much, just as the American blacks have to pretend to be that. And especially these days. So what can you do? I don't know. Can you journal? Can you create art to express your point of view? Can you talk to one another and express what it's like for you? Somehow get it out of you. Express it. Express means to push it out of you somehow. Even if political activity at this point is forbidden to you. Even if you're not allowed to speak your truth, can you at least not isolate yourself? Meet with others, speak with them, share with them. Again, write about it, create art about it, do something. Even in the concentration camps, people created art. They created music. They wrote poetry. They talked to each other if they could. That's very weak advice again, but it's the best I can tell you. And don't judge yourself. Don't call yourself a coward. Don't lay that extra burden of self-torment on what is already a very difficult situation. That's my cat saying hello here. All right,
So,
shall we take one?
Assaf and myself were wondering if you want to take one more question or
I'll take one more question.
Great. So we're gonna open the mic for Nairuz. Let me just find her. Hold on a sec. Here you go. Nairuza. Nairuz, if you unmute yourself, yeah.
Hi. Hello, do you hear me?
It would be great
Yes.
if you opened also, but yeah, depends on you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my video is not working. Hi, my name is Nairuz. So thank you so much for everything. I have met you in Jericho when you were 2 years ago, and I'm just wondering because I am very passionate on working with trauma, and I'm in this situation. I feel like my body, if I listen to the news or if I am involved somehow in what's going on, I feel like I'm creating new traumas inside of me, even though that I dance and I use meditation. And my question is, from your experience of working with trauma, how can a person protect her or himself from getting new traumas in the middle of a situation like this? Yeah, thank you so much.
It's a difficult one. But I would say, this is just my point of view, it's not necessarily traumatic to work with traumatized people. It's not necessarily traumatic. It can be. In my own experience, in my opinion, if you're traumatized working with traumatized people, then there are two things going on. One is you're not taking care of yourself. You're working too hard. You're putting in too much over too long a period of time. You have to set limits. You have to set boundaries, and you have to say, what am I up for? The reality is there's so much trauma on both sides. On the individual, psychological, subjective level, there's so much trauma on both sides. And all the trauma therapists, and more is being created all the time. And all the trauma therapists in the world, yourself included, can work 24 hours, 7 days a week. It would not be a drop in the bucket. So you might as well just understand the limitations of what you can do. And take care of yourself, whatever that takes. Make sure you sleep, eat well, look after your body, look after your soul. If doing all that, you still find yourself really traumatized, I'm not talking about sad. Of course you'll feel sad. That's not being traumatized. That's just feeling sad. You might feel anger. That's not trauma. That's just anger. Trauma is when you're wounded and you can't function, or your functioning is limited by your wound. So you can have anger, you can have stress, you can have pain. You don't necessarily have to be traumatized. You can't, if you're a human being, you can't protect yourself from the pain. So feel it, talk about it. But if you really find yourself traumatized, put into states that are unmanageable, if your functioning is being affected, then I suggest it's not what you're working with that's causing that, but some unresolved trauma in yourself that's being triggered by the work that you're doing. And in that case, You have more trauma work to do inside yourself. So take care of yourself. Expect to feel pain and stress and sorrow and grief. Of course you will. That's not being traumatized. That's just being a human being. But if traumatic imprints show up, I think that's something within yourself that needs to be attended to. Well, that's, I hope that provides some kind of an answer. Thank you for all your questions.
Thank you so much for all these answers. I really appreciate it. Yeah, Assaf, do you want to say anything before we go? And maybe then I can speak or whatever. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just like to express my appreciation both for all the participants. We had a lot of both Israelis and Palestinians, and I really value it. And I noticed that for me, some of the answers to the questions were right for everyone in a way. And knowing that now I have this identity, and I think I don't have the other identity, but somehow I actually also hold all identities within me. So I can take something from everything. And I also wish to thank for the feeling of intimacy and closeness of this talk, and the possibility of going deeper. So thank you for the time and for the your heart expressions and everything that you bring. And thank you, Muna, also for everything, and our interpreters and the UTs who managed the meeting. So many people who brought this about. So it's a great thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I would also like to thank you so much, Dr. Gabor Mate, for mainly for me listening to you this evening. It's kind of continuously brought me back to my own experience. And for me, it appears to be a real key to deal with the situation. Like every time that my mind goes to the other, and then I get trapped in the anger, or get trapped in conversation, or get trapped in argument within my mind, and I find that constantly coming back to whatever I am experiencing is the key for me to deal with whatever is going on. And also simply remembering that this is the way that our narratives are crossing each other, and that basically we just need to go through whatever we need to go through in this life, and we're finding in our narratives to interpret reality in a way that serves us. So I hope we find a way that serves everyone. And I really appreciate your willingness to talk and your generosity, and just answering every person into their own place. I thank you so much for that. That's really not taken for granted.
Okay, well, thank you, and shalom and salam alaikum to everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you.